What if the darkest part of humanity is not a distant threat, but something that lives quietly inside you? You are taught to believe that wickedness belongs to monsters, to criminals, to broken people beyond repair. But what if wickedness is far more common, far more quiet, and far more familiar than you expected? In this journey, we will descend into the psychology of evil, not to glorify it, but to understand it. Because understanding is power, and ignorance is where the darkest deeds begin. This is not just a study of wicked people, this is a mirror for human nature itself, a mirror for you. Have you ever felt pleasure in someone else's failure? Ever ignored a cry for help, not out of hate, but out of indifference? Have you ever felt the pull, even for a moment, to hurt someone who hurt you first? You are not alone. There is a hidden side to human nature that is often denied, buried, and left to fester. In psychology, it is called the dark psychology, the study of manipulation, malevolence, control, and cruelty. But dark psychology is not just a tool used by abusers and predators. It is also something that arises in everyday life, in small decisions, in subtle urges. This is the darkness we rarely admit, not the acts of villains in horror films, but the kind of wickedness that masquerades as normal, the kind that sits in office chairs, dines at the table, smiles in public, the kind that justifies harm with logic, pride, or even love. The truth is painful. Wickedness is not only possible in ordinary people, it is often inevitable unless we actively resist it. Why do humans, even those with empathy and conscience, do terrible things when given power or pressure? How can someone, once kind and full of love, become cold, manipulative, even cruel? Can the urge to control others, to dominate, to punish, exist inside people who claim to hate such things? These are not abstract questions. These are your questions. You may never commit murder or orchestrate terror, but have you ever shamed someone into silence, lied to protect your image, used guilt to manipulate someone close to you? These are subtle forms of psychological wickedness, and they are more common than you think. Psychological studies have shown that under the right conditions, ordinary people are capable of extraordinary cruelty. The famous Milgram experiment in the 1960s, for example, revealed how easily individuals would obey authority, even when it meant harming others. In the Stanford prison experiment, college students, healthy, normal, and untrained, adopted roles so completely that they began to inflict genuine emotional torment on each other within days. So, what does this mean? It means the dark side of human nature is not a myth, it is not an exception, it is a built-in part of the psyche, shaped by evolution, survival, and social conditioning. It is not only present in the hearts of others, but present in you, in me, in all of us. And yet, here lies the paradox. If wickedness is in our nature, can we ever truly overcome it? Or must we first accept our own capacity for evil before we can become truly good? This is your chance to look inward, to reflect on your instincts, your past, and your reactions. This is not a comfortable path, but it may be the most important journey you take, not through the world, but through the terrain of your own mind. So stay with me, watch closely, because the further we go, the more you may realize. The abyss does not only stare back, it whispers. To understand the dark psychology of wickedness, we must begin where it all started, at the roots of human nature itself. Long before there were laws, ethics, or civilizations, there were instincts. Survival was not an abstract value, it was a brutal necessity. Early humans lived in environments of constant threat, predators, starvation, rival tribes. In this ancient landscape, kindness was not always an advantage. Sometimes cruelty meant survival. Evolutionary psychology suggests that many of our so-called dark traits, aggression, jealousy, manipulation, were not mistakes of nature, but adaptive behaviors. They increased reproductive success, protected offspring, and established dominance within social groups. When resources were scarce, being ruthless could mean the difference between life and death. This is why some of the same impulses that helped us survive are now considered immoral or dangerous in modern society. The mind evolved to keep us alive, not to make us good. Take envy, for example. At its core, envy alerts you to what someone else has that you do not. Status, affection, wealth. In the wild, that emotion could drive you to compete, to innovate, or to claim your share. But in today's world, envy often spirals into hatred, resentment, or passive cruelty. You might celebrate someone's failure, not because you are evil, but because your ancient mind is still wired to feel victory when a rival loses. And what about aggression? Controlled aggression helped our ancestors defend themselves, claim territory, and enforce social rules. But today, that same drive can show up in road rage, toxic relationships, or digital harassment. These primal instincts did not disappear when humans built cities and wrote constitutions. They simply adapted. Wickedness, in its modern form, still emerges from ancient roots. The psychological need to dominate, to win, to destroy a rival. It is all part of the same old dance, just wearing newer clothes. Now here is a paradox worth pondering. If wickedness evolved as a tool for survival, does that make it natural? And if it is natural, can we truly blame someone for following their nature? This is where philosophy enters the conversation. Thomas Hobbes, a 17th century philosopher, believed that without laws and order, life would be solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. He argued that human nature, at its core, is selfish and violent, and that society exists to tame these impulses. In contrast, Jean-Jacques Rousseau believed that people were naturally good, and it was civilization that corrupted them. So who was right? Modern psychology leans toward Hobbes, but with nuance. People are not born evil, but neither are they born purely good. They are born capable of both tenderness and cruelty, compassion and rage. Studies in behavioral neuroscience show that even infants display early signs of moral judgment. Babies as young as 6 months prefer helpful puppets over harmful ones in experiments. Yet those same babies, when placed in competitive scenarios, also show early possessiveness, even aggression. The truth is uncomfortable. Human nature is dual by design. We are wired for both cooperation and conflict, for love and for violence. Our psychology contains both the light and the dark, and what emerges depends on the context. So where does wickedness begin? Not in the heart of monsters, but in the primitive machinery of your brain, in your limbic system, the ancient structure that drives emotions like fear, lust, and rage, in your amygdala, which fires at threats, real or imagined, and in your prefrontal cortex, which sometimes overrides those impulses, but not always. Here is something you may not want to hear. The darker parts of you are not defects. They are part of the original design. Have you ever acted selfishly, not because you were proud of it, but because it felt necessary? Have you ever hurt someone emotionally, even while justifying it as fair? You are not evil for having these instincts, but if you deny them, ignore them, or pretend they do not exist, you may one day be ruled by them. Understanding your roots is not an excuse, it is a responsibility. If wickedness begins in nature, it takes shape in the mind. While every person has the potential for darkness, some carry it more visibly, more persistently. Psychology has long studied these individuals, not to shame them, but to understand the mechanisms behind cruelty, manipulation, and emotional harm. What makes someone act not just impulsively, but with calculated malice? One of the most studied concepts in modern psychology is the dark triad, a set of 3 overlapping personality traits: narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy. Each of these traits reveals a unique shade of human wickedness. Narcissism is not just vanity, it is a deep, often fragile obsession with the self, a hunger for admiration, and a tendency to view others as either tools or threats. When a narcissist is criticized or ignored, the reaction is not just disappointment, it is rage. And in that rage, empathy vanishes. Machiavellianism, named after the political philosopher Niccolò Machiavelli, is the tendency to manipulate others with charm, deceit, and strategic coldness. It is not impulsive, it is deliberate. It is the friend who pretends to support you while silently dismantling your progress. The colleague who flatters your strengths while plotting your removal. Then there is psychopathy, the darkest of the 3. Psychopaths are known for their lack of empathy, shallow emotions, and thrill-seeking behavior. But not all psychopaths are violent criminals. Some are CEOs, lawyers, even doctors. They wear the right clothes, say the right things, and understand human behavior, not to connect with it, but to exploit it. The Haar psychopathy checklist, developed by psychologist Dr. Robert Haar, remains one of the most reliable tools for identifying psychopathic traits. It evaluates traits like glib charm, grandiose sense of self-worth, lack of remorse, and failure to accept responsibility. The most chilling thing about this checklist is not how rare it is to score high, but how many people show moderate levels in everyday life. Here is a question worth asking yourself. Have you ever told a lie, not to escape punishment, but just to see if you could get away with it? If the answer is yes, then you have tasted the same impulse that drives the dark triad. The difference is not in the presence of the impulse, but in how often it speaks, and how much power you give it. These personality traits do not operate in isolation. They are often fueled by deeper emotional wounds, childhood trauma, emotional neglect, or environments that reward dominance over empathy. When a child learns that power equals safety, they may grow up believing that love is a weakness, and control is the only form of respect. But here is the paradox. Some of the most wicked behaviors are performed by those who feel most powerless. Have you ever met someone who hurt others just to feel like they mattered? Sometimes, darkness emerges not from strength, but from pain. The need to punish others becomes a cry for recognition, a scream into the void that says, "I exist and I will not be ignored." Psychologists also warn of a concept called moral licensing. This occurs when people use their past good behavior to justify future bad actions. For example, someone might think, "I am a good person. I donated to charity last month, so it is okay if I treat this person with a little less respect today." This quiet justification allows wickedness to sneak in, not as an explosion, but as a whisper. The human mind is a master of self-deception. This is why some of the most dangerous individuals are not those who openly reject morality, but those who believe they are morally superior. So here is a final question for you to sit with. If your mind is capable of justifying harm, even while convincing you that you are a good person, how do you ever know where wickedness truly begins? Psychological wickedness is not just found in diagnosable disorders. It is found in rationalizations, ego wounds, and unchecked desire. To understand the wicked mind is not to distance yourself from it. It is to realize how near it truly is. What if the line between good and evil is not drawn between people, but through each person? This is not just a poetic question, it is a psychological truth. One of the most disturbing findings in modern psychology is not that evil exists in the world, but that it can be committed by ordinary people, in ordinary settings, under extraordinary circumstances. Perhaps you believe you would never harm a stranger, but would you, if an authority figure told you to? If everyone else did it first? If you believed it was for the greater good? In 1961, psychologist Stanley Milgram conducted an experiment that would shock the world. Participants were instructed to administer electric shocks to another person whenever they answered a question incorrectly. The shocks were fake, but the participants did not know that. Many believed they were genuinely hurting someone, yet over 65% of them obeyed the instructions, going all the way to the highest voltage, simply because an authority figure in a lab coat told them to. Why did they obey? Why did they inflict pain? Milgram concluded that people are disturbingly obedient to authority when responsibility is shifted away from them. It is not that they lacked conscience, it is that their conscience had been outsourced. Another powerful example comes from the Stanford prison experiment in 1971, led by psychologist Philip Zimbardo. College students were randomly assigned to be either guards or prisoners in a simulated prison environment. Within just 6 days, the guards became sadistic, and the prisoners emotionally broken. The experiment was shut down prematurely. Zimbardo's conclusion was chilling. People conform quickly to social roles, especially when those roles are aligned with systems of power and control. Even good people can become perpetrators when the environment encourages it. You might ask yourself, could I have done the same? It is easy to say no, but statistically, most people, given the same cues, the same pressure, would say yes with their actions, even while saying no with their words. This is the paradox of wickedness. It often wears the mask of goodness. It does not always feel like evil when you are doing it. Sometimes it feels like duty, justice, or loyalty. Have you ever excluded someone from a group, not because they harmed anyone, but because everyone else did it first? Have you ever punished someone with silence just to make a point, even if they never knew what they did wrong. These small acts may seem harmless, even justified, but they are echoes of a deeper truth. Evil rarely announces itself. It sneaks in, justified by emotions, normalized by others, and excused by your inner voice. Psychologist Albert Bandura coined the term moral disengagement, a process by which individuals justify unethical behavior through mechanisms like displacement of responsibility, dehumanization, or euphemistic labeling. For instance, calling civilians collateral damage in war makes violence easier to process. Calling a betrayal just business numbs the guilt. This mental detachment is not rare. It is how most people cope with moral contradiction. But over time, it creates distance between who you think you are and what you actually do. Now ask yourself this: have you ever felt relief after hurting someone emotionally because you convinced yourself they deserved it? This is not an admission of evil. It is an acknowledgement of your capacity for rationalizing harm. The truth is painful but freeing. You are capable of wickedness, not because you are broken, but because you are human. To believe that only monsters do evil is to miss the lesson entirely. Real wickedness often comes dressed in righteousness. It is polite, well-spoken, and convinced of its own virtue. So then, how do you guard against it? Not by assuming you are too good to fall, but by accepting that anyone can, and then watching your steps with honesty. Because sometimes, the most dangerous people are not those who embrace evil, but those who never imagine it could live inside them. If good people can do evil things, then what about the ones who seem to enjoy it? Power, once tasted, has a strange effect on the human psyche. It alters judgment, distorts empathy, and can ignite a quiet desire that few admit. The desire not just to lead, but to dominate. Not just to be respected, but to be feared. This shift is not always loud or theatrical. Sometimes it looks like micromanaging, like silent punishment, like emotional leverage. But at its core, it is about control. And control, when left unchecked, often drifts toward cruelty. Studies in neuropsychology show that power affects the brain. It reduces activation in areas associated with empathy and increases risk-taking behaviors. Those who feel powerful are more likely to interrupt others, more likely to objectify people, and more likely to justify immoral decisions. The reward systems in the brain, the dopamine circuits, are triggered by the feeling of dominance, of being untouchable. Now imagine combining power with pain. There is a term in psychology, everyday sadism. It refers to people who derive pleasure from witnessing or causing minor suffering. Not in extreme ways, but in jokes that humiliate, in gossip that destroys, in sarcasm that wounds. These actions often appear harmless on the surface, even funny, but underneath they feed on something much darker, the thrill of emotional superiority. Have you ever felt a small rush after proving someone wrong, especially if they embarrassed you first? Have you ever wanted someone to fail, just so they would feel what you felt? These are human emotions. They do not make you evil, but if you do not recognize them, they can quietly grow into patterns that erode your compassion. Philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche warned that he who cannot obey himself must command. In other words, the desire to control others often comes from a failure to govern one's own emotions. When people feel small inside, they seek power outside, and once they taste it, the urge to maintain it, even through fear or cruelty, can become addictive. This is how wickedness spreads, not always from sadists, but from the insecure, from people who feel powerless and are terrified of ever feeling that way again. Think of how children who are bullied sometimes become bullies themselves. Think of how leaders who once fought for justice become paranoid and oppressive. Power is a mirror. It reveals what was already inside. Here lies another disturbing paradox. The more power you gain, the harder it becomes to see your own cruelty. You justify, you rationalize, you believe your decisions are for the greater good, and maybe they are. But deep inside, you must ask, do you feel more alive when you are in control? Sadism does not always look like physical violence. Often it looks like apathy, like indifference, like punishing someone emotionally, just because you can. It is the manager who mocks an employee's weakness, the friend who enjoys being the one in charge of every plan, the parent who disciplines with shame instead of guidance. Everyday sadism, even in small doses, can condition the brain. Psychologist Erin Buckles, in her research on the subject, found that people with higher sadistic tendencies were more likely to enjoy tasks that involved harming others, even when no gain was involved. They were more willing to kill bugs, administer loud noise blasts, or sabotage competitors, not out of anger, but out of enjoyment. Now pause and ask yourself this: have you ever felt empowered by someone else's pain, not because it was deserved, but because it made you feel stronger? That feeling, no matter how fleeting, is the root of the problem. Understanding the psychology of power and sadism is not about judging others. It is about confronting the small tyrants within yourself, the ones that emerge in moments of stress, insecurity, or revenge. You may not be a villain, but if you ignore how power changes your mind, you may become something far more dangerous. A villain who believes they are a hero. If wickedness begins in nature and is shaped by the mind, then society becomes its stage, and sometimes its amplifier. You do not live in a vacuum. From the moment you are born, you are surrounded by systems, language, norms, entertainment, politics. And while many of these systems aim to protect you, some subtly teach you how to ignore pain, how to prioritize image over integrity, and how to participate in cruelty without ever realizing it. Culture does not just reflect what people believe, it shapes what people become. Consider how television and film often glorify violence, dominance, and revenge. The anti-hero, the cold genius, the ruthless leader, they are praised not despite their wickedness but because of it. Their cruelty is framed as cleverness, their detachment becomes charisma, and slowly, without noticing, you begin to admire what once disturbed you. Have you ever rooted for the villain, not because they were right, but because they were powerful? This is not accidental, it is psychological conditioning. Media exposure influences moral judgment. Studies in social psychology show that repeated exposure to morally ambiguous characters can normalize unethical behavior. The brain becomes desensitized, not because it wants to lose empathy, but because repetition rewires your emotional response. But the influence runs deeper. Think about propaganda. Whether in history books or political campaigns, propaganda works by simplifying complex human beings into labels: enemy, criminal, outsider. This mental reduction makes it easier to dehumanize, to exclude, to punish. The 20th century offers terrifying proof: the Holocaust, the Rwandan genocide, the Khmer Rouge regime. These atrocities did not begin with mass killings. They began with language, with stories, with systems that taught ordinary people to believe that cruelty was a form of duty. And yet you may ask, what does this have to do with my life today? The answer is more than you think. Dehumanization still exists, just in subtler forms. Online, people attack others anonymously, using words as weapons. In schools and workplaces, bullying hides behind sarcasm or policies. In everyday speech, entire groups are reduced to stereotypes, with no room for nuance or empathy. Culture rewards certain types of cruelty: the cutthroat entrepreneur, the unapologetic influencer, the cold boss who gets results. These figures are often admired, and behind that admiration, there is a quiet lesson. Kindness is weakness. Compassion is a liability. If you want to win, you must be willing to hurt. Now ask yourself, how many times have you ignored a small injustice simply because it was normal? Philosopher Hannah Arendt once wrote about the banality of evil. She observed how great evils in history were not carried out by fanatics, but by ordinary people. People who simply followed orders, accepted norms, and avoided responsibility. Evil, in her view, was not always monstrous. It was mindless. It was a lack of thinking, a failure to reflect. Social environments play a powerful role in shaping that failure. Have you ever laughed at a cruel joke just to fit in? Have you remained silent when someone was hurt, simply because speaking up felt uncomfortable? These are not crimes, but they are cracks in the moral structure. And if enough people ignore the cracks, the whole system can collapse. The truth is difficult. Wickedness often survives, not through action, but through silence. This is why understanding cultural influence is essential. You may not control what the world celebrates, but you can question what it asks you to accept. So here is a thought to sit with. What parts of yourself were shaped by a culture that praises domination, punishes vulnerability, and disguises cruelty as confidence? If you never ask, you may never know. And if you never know, you may mistake learned wickedness for your own identity. If culture teaches wickedness and the mind justifies it, then where does it live once it enters you? Deep in the psyche, beneath your conscious thoughts and polished behavior, lies what Carl Jung called the shadow. It is the part of you that holds everything you reject, deny, or refuse to admit about yourself. Your envy, your hatred, your cruelty, your shame. Jung believed that to become whole, you must confront this hidden self, not to destroy it, but to integrate it. The shadow is not evil in itself. It is simply the part of you that you fear to see. It leaks in sarcastic comments, in passive aggression, in the way you treat those you believe cannot fight back, in fantasies of revenge, in irrational outbursts, in the quiet joy you sometimes feel when someone gets what they deserve. But what happens when you ignore it? You may think you are a good person, and perhaps you are, but goodness without self-awareness is fragile. It is a house built on denial. The more you believe, "I would never," the more likely you are to do exactly that. When the moment is right, the pressure is high, and the mask slips. Psychologically, the shadow contains what Jung called your inferior functions. These are emotions and impulses you have deemed unacceptable, but they do not disappear. They go underground, and from there they influence your behavior in ways you cannot see. Have you ever had a dream where you were the villain and woke up disturbed, unsure what it meant? Have you ever lashed out at someone, only to feel confused by your own reaction? These are echoes from your shadow. The parts of you that could be assertive, powerful, even wise, may be buried in the same soil as your anger and fear. This is where wickedness becomes most dangerous, not when it is expressed, but when it is ignored. Unacknowledged darkness does not fade, it festers, and when triggered, it can explode, not in acts of heroism, but in moments of shocking cruelty. Modern psychotherapy often explores this inner realm. Techniques like dream analysis, inner child work, and shadow journaling all attempt to bring unconscious impulses into the light, because the shadow is not just where your darkness lives, it is also where your repressed potential hides. Jung once wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Have you ever called someone else toxic, only to behave the same way in different clothes? So ask yourself, what parts of your personality have you exiled? If wickedness lives in your instincts, your mind, and your culture, then what hope is there? The hope is in your choice. Because despite all the forces that shape your darkness, there is one truth that echoes across psychology and philosophy. You are not only what has shaped you, you are what you choose to become. The temptation of evil is not always a grand spectacle. Sometimes it is subtle, a tiny moment, a private decision, the kind of moment that no one else sees, but one that reveals everything about you. Maybe it is when you feel the urge to humiliate someone who embarrassed you. Maybe it is when you feel powerful after hurting someone who trusted you. Or maybe it is the quiet thrill of being the one in control, even if it means stepping on someone's dignity. So what stops you? Empathy is one answer, not the fluffy kind that demands you smile all the time, but the grounded, disciplined kind that asks, what would this feel like if it happened to me? Neuroscience shows that empathy activates mirror neurons in your brain, allowing you to literally feel a version of another's pain. But empathy alone is fragile. It must be trained. Because in moments of anger, fear, or stress, empathy is often the first thing to disappear. This is where conscience comes in. Your conscience is not just a voice inside you. It is a muscle. And like all muscles, it weakens if you ignore it. Every time you rationalize a cruel choice, the voice gets quieter. But every time you pause, reflect, and choose differently, the voice gets stronger. Have you ever felt guilt, even when no one else knew what you did? That guilt, painful as it is, can be a gift. It reminds you that your humanity is still intact. Psychologist Viktor Frankl, who survived Nazi concentration camps, wrote that between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose. In our choice lies our growth and our freedom. This space is where wickedness is resisted, not by instinct, not by impulse, but by conscious reflection. Now, here is the paradox. The more you deny your potential for evil, the easier it becomes to act in evil ways. But the more you accept it, the more power you have to choose something better. Have you ever felt yourself on the edge of a bad decision, but paused even for one breath and chose a kinder path? That moment matters more than you think. It is not dramatic, but it is sacred. Philosophy often speaks of virtue, not as a natural gift, but as a practice. Aristotle believed that you become good by doing good, not once, not occasionally, but daily, deliberately, even when no one is watching. This is not about perfection, it is about resistance, the slow, quiet resistance to the easy path. Have you ever apologized even when it wounded your pride? Have you forgiven someone, not because they earned it, but because hate was poisoning you? These choices are not signs of weakness, they are signs of strength, the kind of strength that does not seek to win, but to heal. There is also spiritual intelligence, a form of awareness that goes beyond rationality. It is the part of you that knows when something feels wrong, even when logic says it is fine. It is the whisper in your soul that asks, is this who you want to become? Psychologists now study moral elevation, the emotion you feel when you witness someone do something deeply good. It lifts you, inspires you, reminds you that goodness is not a myth, that even in a world stained by cruelty, beauty still breathes. So ask yourself this: what kind of presence do you leave behind when you walk out of a room? Do people feel smaller or seen? Do you add pain to the world or help carry some of it? You do not have to be perfect, but you do have to be aware, because wickedness is not always about doing the worst things. Sometimes it is about never stopping to ask, what is right? You have walked through the shadows of history, of culture, of your own mind. What you have seen is not easy to hold. That wickedness is not some distant monster, but a mirror. That the darkness of human nature is not always about destruction, but about disconnection. Disconnection from empathy, from responsibility, from truth. But now that you have seen it, you cannot unsee it. And that may be the beginning of something rare. Awareness is not passive, it is a kind of light. A light that does not erase the dark, but allows you to walk through it without getting lost. You have learned that the human brain is wired for both survival and sabotage. That instincts, when left unchecked, can turn love into control, power into cruelty, pain into punishment. You have seen how culture often rewards what it should condemn, and how morality is not inherited, but practiced. But what do you do with this awareness? You take responsibility, not just for your actions, but for your reactions, not just for what you say, but for what you refuse to question. Responsibility does not mean guilt, it means ownership. It means looking in the mirror and saying, I am capable of both harm and healing, and today I will choose. Have you ever made peace with someone you once judged unfairly? Have you ever taken a hard look at your own pride and said, this is not who I want to be? Those moments are small acts of redemption, and redemption is not a reward, it is a return to your most human self. Psychology teaches us that while trauma and conditioning shape your behavior, they do not seal your fate. The brain is plastic. It changes with thought, with intention, with repetition. You can rewire your habits. You can change how you speak to yourself. You can soften the edges that once seemed permanent. Even if you have hurt others, even if you have enjoyed power a little too much, even if you have silenced your conscience more times than you can count, you are not doomed. You are not fixed. You are not lost. Because redemption is always possible for those who are willing to be honest. In philosophy, the Greek concept of metanoia speaks of a profound transformation, a turning of the mind, a shift in being. It does not come from punishment, it comes from seeing clearly, from facing what is within you, without turning away. Have you ever cried, not because you were weak, but because you finally felt the weight of someone else's pain? Have you ever chosen silence, not to ignore, but to listen? These are signs that your humanity is still alive. The world does not need perfect people. It needs aware people, responsible people, people who have touched their darkness and because of that, choose the light. And here is the final paradox. Understanding wickedness may be the first step toward becoming truly good. Because the person who knows what evil feels like, smells like, and whispers like is the one most capable of resisting it. So ask yourself, as this journey ends, what kind of world do you want to help build? One that repeats pain, or one that redeems it? The answer is not out there. It is in how you speak when you are angry, in how you treat those who cannot give you anything, in the choices you make when no one else is watching. The dark psychology of wickedness is not just an academic subject. It is a map of your own potential, both the harm you could do and the healing you are capable of. If you have stayed with me this far, then you are already doing the hardest part, looking inward, honestly, courageously. You do not need to be afraid of the dark anymore, because you are learning how to carry your own light.